This video is about Pentax 645N, a camera that I wanted since 2010. And finally, around 1 year ago, I found one with 3 lenses and a teleconverter for a very reasonable price. Pentax 645N competes in a very exclusive league, which is the analog 645 medium format autofocus cameras. And its rivals are very big names such as Hasselblad H1, Contax 645 and Mamiya 645 AF. Of course, when you hear these big names, you may think that the poor Pentax has nothing to offer, but I'm gonna prove that it's the best overall option for a camera enthusiast like me who likes to shoot a variety of subjects. But before going into that, I want to explain my experience with this camera. First of all, I have to say that it's a heavy camera. How heavy, you might ask? Well, the body alone is around 1.5 kilo. And the 45 to 85 millimeter lens is 906 grams on my kitchen scale. My two other lenses are even heavier. The 80 to 160 is more than 1 kilo and my 400 millimeter lens is more than 1300 grams. The camera itself is such a breeze to work with. All the controls are on your fingertips, including shutter speed, exposure compensation, metering, self-timer, and focus and metering lock. If this control layout seems familiar to you, you may have seen it on one of the most beloved cameras of today, the Fuji X-T1 series. But remember that the Pentax 645N was released in 1997 or 17 years before the Fuji X-T1. The camera grip is also very good. Of course, it is a little bit different from today's modern grips, but it is still very comfortable. The camera operates with 6 AA batteries and the battery life is said to be around 130 rolls. And I still have a little less than half of this limit to completely drain my current batteries. It has 2 tripod sockets which make it very easy to change from landscape to portrait orientation. The strap lugs are a little bit different from other cameras, but nothing you can't handle it. The shutter sound is pleasing, but it is loud, and the camera also has a 2 frames per second mode that sounds even louder. And yes, the camera has a continuous autofocus mode. It is nothing that can compete with modern cameras, and of course I have never used it, but I find it a cool feature, and as you can see here, it actually works. In general, you can rely on autofocus, but remember that in low light it will struggle a little. I found the shutter to be stable, and my best record was the slow shutter speed of 1/3 of a second with my 45 to 85 mm lens. Loading the film is fairly easy, but remember that this camera doesn't have an interchangeable back like its rivals, and I think it's the biggest downside of the camera, and I'm not sure why Pentax engineers didn't consider it. But it is what it is, and to be honest, I personally never felt the need to change the film mid-roll, but I know that for some people it may be a deal breaker. Now let's talk about lenses. In general, I'm very happy with the image quality of all of my three lenses on film. My most versatile lens is naturally the 45 to 85 millimeter, but I think the image quality of 80 to 160 is much better. But of course, I find both of these lenses very heavy for what they are. Of course, I love the 400mm the most because it is a unique lens and there is simply no other medium format autofocus telephoto lens as long as this one in the market. In my trip to Calgary, I had the opportunity to use my 45 to 85mm lens on a Pentax 645Z body and take a couple of snapshots. I expected the lens to be terribly soft for the 50 megapixel sensor of the 645Z, but it wasn't actually bad at all. Here is one photo that I took of my wife and I think it turned out to be fine. After this test, I was very curious to test the lenses on a digital sensor, and I found a cheap Pentax 645 to Nikon F adapter on eBay, and I paired it with my Nikon to Leica M adapter, and my adapter, of course being cheap, cannot change the aperture, so I was stuck with the lens wide open. When I tested the sharpness of 45 to 85 millimeter and 80 to 60, I can see that they are sharp enough for my taste. But if I shoot a backlit subject, I can get some nasty flare and loss of contrast. Here is what a modern lens can do to compare. When it comes to bokeh, I really like the background blur of both 45 to 85 and 80 to 160 lenses. But in terms of the bokeh balls, they disappointed me with their polygonal shape. And in terms of focus breathing, they are not perfect, but I think they are acceptable, especially considering their age. Now let's get back to the super league that this Pentax plays in. There are 4 factors that help the Pentax 645N to outperform most of its rivals. The first factor is price. All the big names that I mentioned in the beginning of video are very expensive. Today, a working Contax 645 with a lens will be easily more than $5,000, and of course it has a lot of reliability issues. Same for Hasselblad H1 or even H2. You may be able to find a body with a reasonable price, but the lenses are much more expensive. Mamiya 645 AF is also more expensive than the Pentax, and of course I prefer the handling of Pentax over Mamiya. On the other hand, these days you can easily find a Pentax 645N with a lens for less than $1,000. The second factor is the lenses. Of course, you might say that we don't get Hasselblad or Zeiss glass in the Pentax system, but there are still gems such as 75mm f2.8, and if you want, you can always use the legendary lenses from Pentax 6.7 system right on this camera. But the more important fact for me is that none of the other systems provide such a wide range of lenses from ultra wide to super telephoto. The third factor is controls and handling. I think with physical controls for almost all the settings, it's an easy win for Pentax, and in my opinion, all the cameras should be like this. And finally, the fourth factor is the very easy way to digital. You can use your Pentax 645 FA lenses on Pentax 645D or Pentax 645Z with autofocus and aperture control. So my final verdict for this camera is that I think for someone like me, as a camera enthusiast who just wants a autofocus medium format camera, it is the best option. And I'm gonna keep the camera body and the 400mm lens, but I probably will sell the 45 to 85 and 80 to 160 only because they are too heavy, and I will probably get a small prime lens like the 75mm f2.8. So that was it, my experience with Pentax 645N. I hope you liked this video, and please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and also feel free to follow me on Instagram.